Welcome to the Insomnia Coach podcast. My name is Martin Reed. I believe that by changing how we respond to insomnia and all the difficult thoughts and feelings that come with it, we can move away from struggling with insomnia and toward living the life we want to live. The content of this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not medical advice and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, disorder, or medical condition. It should never replace any advice given to you by your physician or any other licensed healthcare provider. Insomnia Coach LLC offers coaching services only and does not provide therapy, counseling, medical advice, or medical treatment. The statements and opinions expressed by guests are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Insomnia Coach LLC. All content is provided as is and without warranties, either express or implied. Laura never expected insomnia to arrive during one of the happiest times in her life. She had just gotten engaged. She was heading out on vacation. But one sleepless night quietly snowballed into many. And nights quickly became something she feared. She tried everything: supplements, routines, medication, strict sleep hygiene, but nothing seemed to work. The harder she tried to fix sleep, the more distant it became. And eventually, she realized the struggle wasn't just with sleep, it was with her thoughts and feelings about sleep. She found herself caught in a loop, trying to control, reason with, avoid, or edit every uncomfortable thought, every wave of fear or frustration, and it was exhausting. The real shift came when she began to relate to insomnia differently, not as a problem to defeat, but as an experience to meet with less resistance. She practiced making space for the thoughts and feelings that showed up, and bringing her attention back to actions that helped her live the life she wanted to live. It wasn't a straight path. There were setbacks, relapses, hard nights that tested her resolve. But each time there was something to learn, because while change is hard, not changing can be even harder. And Laura kept going, with persistence, with compassion, with honesty, with courage. Today, she still has the occasional tough night, like all of us do. But those nights have lost all the power and influence they once had over her. She knows how to move forward independently of sleep, and no matter what thoughts and feelings might be present. This is Laura's story. A full transcript of this podcast and an accompanying video can be found at insomniacoach.com/podcast. Okay, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come onto the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. Let's start right at the very beginning, as always. Can you tell us when your issues with sleep first began and what you feel might have caused those initial issues, that initial sleep disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that it started about 2.5 years. It was like around August of 2022. So I'm going on 3 years since it initially started. And I would say there wasn't a particularly super stressful, negative stressful life event, but I remember that I was going on a trip abroad. And right before I left for the trip, my husband proposed to me. And I was very excited. I was happy and excited, but I was so excited that I couldn't sleep that night. Going into the next night, we went and I think we stayed at his aunt and uncle live near JFK airport. So we went and stayed with them. And I think we were up late. I wasn't in my own environment. I struggled to sleep again. The next night we had the flight. So it was a red eye. And I cannot sleep on airplanes. I can't get comfortable. So I was up again. And I remember that was kind of the moment where and now I know, in retrospect, that was the moment where I started to place this level of importance on it of this is bad. But I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, okay, this is bad. I need to sleep. I really need to sleep tonight. And I remember the first day on the trip, we get there, I had a pretty good day, but the hours leading into bedtime, I started to just get really nervous and putting a lot of pressure on needing to sleep because I just didn't at the time I couldn't perceive myself being able to enjoy a vacation if I wasn't sleeping. So I went to bed that night and it was like full blown like panic, that like hyper arousal feeling like of, yeah, just anxiety and like shakiness, having to get up to go to the bathroom every 30 minutes, like just so over the top anxious. And that kind of started it. And I remember that was the first time. And then that led into 9 nights on the trip. I didn't sleep like almost at all. I would get maybe like an hour of sleep a night on the rest of the trip. And I remember just being so overwhelmed by it. So that's how it started. And then that just spiraled from there.
As the stakes increased, the level of struggle increased. So it was like the more that getting a certain amount or a certain type of sleep felt important to you, the more pressure you were putting on yourself to make sleep happen, the more important it became. Then it was attached to all these outcomes. I can't enjoy this trip if I don't get a certain amount or type of sleep. I can't be the person I want to be. I can't do the things I want to do. And it just mushrooms from there and just pulls you into even more difficulty and even more struggle. So you got back from vacation. Were you at that point there where you were thinking, I'm going to get back from vacation, things will settle down, I'll get back into my life routine and sleep will get back on track?
Yes, and it did actually. So towards the end of the vacation, I finally fell asleep, which again, like I know so much more about it now, so I understand like the process and that the sleep drive had just built up and I crashed for 10 hours on the last night. And that brought my anxiety down enough that I was able to be like, okay, like I'm going home tomorrow. It's going to be fine. I'm going to be in my own environment. And for a couple of nights I was, but I'm a teacher. So this was right before the start of the school year for me. And I came home, I had maybe a week before the school year started. And it was the night before the first day back to school. And I'm laying in bed and it just kind of kicked up again. I have to sleep because I have work tomorrow. And that like really spiraled from there. So that turned into a night of like barely sleeping. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot function at work like this. I'm not gonna be able to function at work like this. And that really led into the worst of it. It was 2 months straight, I would say, of maybe 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night, going to work, trying to push through and going to work every day. Sometimes I would call out if I was really overwhelmed by it. And some nights I'd maybe get 3 or 4 hours, maybe, but most nights it was 1 to 2 hours. I was really like going down the rabbit hole. It was like, this is terrible. I can't live like this. And I would say days were just as bad as nights sometimes because my anxiety was so high about it. So I was even getting a lot of physical symptoms during the day. So I would be really shaky, my heart would race, feelings of like panic and dread. I lost a lot of weight. Felt like I couldn't eat because I was just so scared and didn't understand what was wrong with me.
If you're finding this conversation helpful, please take a moment to click the like button. And if you believe more people should hear real stories of recovery from insomnia, consider subscribing to the channel. Every like and every subscription helps these conversations reach more people who need support. Thanks for being here. I think a lot of people listening to this will identify that part of the journey where it just seems to almost take a life of its own, where it's just becoming more and more powerful, more and more influential. And it's like the more you try to fix it, the more you try to get rid of the insomnia, the more it grows, the more difficult it becomes.
It feels, you start to lose so much trust in yourself and your body, and you lose trust that your body even knows what to do anymore. And you really do start believing that you've lost the ability to sleep. So it really feels like your body's betraying you at that time, which I felt that heavily. I would get mad sometimes.
It can lead to us being pretty mean or hard on ourselves as well. Like, why is this happening to me? This must be my fault. There's something wrong with me or what I'm doing. But everything you were doing at that time, you were doing in an attempt to fix a problem. So nothing you were experiencing was your fault. You were doing the best you could at the time that you were experiencing that.
This has been such a journey, and it has unfolded over the last 2.5 years. And it's included a lot of setbacks. And I do think that framing setbacks as opportunities it's hard in the moment because it doesn't feel like an opportunity. But you come out of it and you're like, oh, wait, okay, it was. The first time around where I was really like at rock bottom, I never had an all-nighter. But in my first setback, I did. And then I actually had multiple all-nighters in a row. And every single one, I've uncovered like a new layer of like resistance that I hadn't discovered before. I've learned so much about it, and I've been able to like take some of the meaning away from it. And I do think that people with insomnia tend to get maybe a little bit more sleep sometimes than they think they do. I think there is some like hypersleep in there, because there would be a couple times where I thought I was wide awake all night and my husband would be like, I heard you snore. Or you were breathing like it really felt like you were asleep. Even if it's just a couple minutes, I do think that there's a little bit more of that in there than maybe we realized, which did help calm me down a little bit. But I would say that even though there were all-nighters, I still could feel that I was on the path to recovery. I was making it mean less.
Relapses or setbacks or roadblocks or obstacles, whatever you want to call them, there's something that comes with any journey. And I love the way that you now are able to see them as learning opportunities, because really that's exactly what they are. They're not evidence that what you're doing isn't working or that you're on the wrong path. It just means that there's something there to learn, to take from it. Looking back, what were the things that you tried to do in an effort to get your sleep back on track that didn't really prove to be helpful or useful for you?
It's funny because I've watched so many of your success stories at this point, and I feel like we all start in the same place. We look up like how to improve my sleep, and the first thing you get is sleep hygiene. So I went all in on sleep hygiene. My nighttime routine was like 4 hours long. I was like, it was exhausting, honestly, just to even have that routine. It was like very disruptive to my lifestyle. My husband is used to eating very late, and I've adjusted to eating very late, but I read that was bad. If you're trying to digest food while trying to fall asleep, it's gonna make it hard, even though I'd literally never had a problem with that in the past. So I started eating dinner at like 5 p.m. instead of 7 or 8 p.m. with him. So I wasn't eating dinner with someone. I was eating alone when I could eat because I was really nauseous. I would avoid screens for 2 or 3 hours before bed. And if I didn't have work to, or even if I did have work to do, that's on the screen. So I was like just sitting there trying to read a book for a couple hours. I would go take a bath to relax every night. I would do yoga. I would do meditations. I would even do like lavender spray on my pillow. Like, I think of the things that I tried, and some of them were like really ridiculous. And even like during the night at that point too, I was like not really letting myself do what felt right at night. So I would get up, because I read you should get up like 15 or 20 minutes after you're not sleeping. And I would go into the living room and read something boring that I didn't like reading, because I was told you have to read something dull so that you get sleepy again. Which like intuitively felt wrong, because I was like, I am very sleepy. I'm very tired. That doesn't seem to be helping though. So I'd read something boring. I would avoid screens. I would avoid harsh lights and turn on a really dim lamp. And I just remember at that time just feeling really lonely, because it wasn't just that I was struggling with sleep at night. I was also making everything in my life around how I would sleep. I cut out caffeine. I don't drink a ton of alcohol, but I would have a glass of wine occasionally. I stopped drinking alcohol altogether. I stopped going out late, so I would make plans around sleep. My husband and I didn't really go out to dinner a lot at that time, and we like to do that together. So it's just like it was becoming so all-consuming, and like everything in my life was revolving around it, so it was very isolating. So yeah, that was kind of like the routine that I was following at that time. It was a long one. It was tiring.
I can just hear from you describing that you are very clearly a very strong problem solver, and you really threw everything at this. You were very determined, very focused to fix this problem. Something that stands out is that so many of the actions that you described seem to be actions that didn't really reflect who you are or the kind of life you want to live. So you started, for example, to eat separately from your husband. You stopped going out in the evenings. You'd read boring stuff rather than interesting stuff. You wouldn't go on screens. So all these things that you were doing were pulling you away from the life you wanted to live. And at the same time, when they weren't fixing sleep, weren't improving the situation that you were in, then you've got all that on top. So you've got the issue with sleep, and then you've got all the things that you're understandably doing to try and fix that problem that are then adding on top of that and making things even more difficult, because you're getting pulled away from doing stuff that matters.
It was a very lonely time. And I think I've heard a lot of people say, and I think a lot of people can relate, like you feel like at the time you were the only person in the world going through this, which I think is why resources like this it was like such a game changer for me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one going through this. I also do want to mention that I did try a lot of medications too, because I think that there's a lot of like mixed feelings and like taboo on medications for this. And I've come a long way with my thoughts on medications and actually not even being like, oh, I don't need them. I've actually come a long way in being able to be like, it's actually okay. And that having less resistance as opposed to more resistance when it comes to medications, if you know that if it feels intuitively right, is actually okay. And I did try different medications, and I will say most of them just didn't work for me. Nothing was going to override that feeling of panic and make me sleep. I stayed up all night one time through an Ambien. Weird experience. I didn't even know that you could stay up through an Ambien, but when you're that like anxious about sleep, it's not necessarily going to cure it.
Yeah, I can definitely tell that you're being kinder to yourself and less judgmental. And I think that is important because, like you said, every individual person is the expert on themselves. So taking something like medication, for example, if someone is comfortable taking medication, then how is that a problem for anyone else? Why should that be a problem for them if they're comfortable to do that? So just as other people shouldn't judge another person, really, why should we judge ourselves if that's something we're comfortable with? And I think that as you do that, as you become kinder to yourself and less judgmental, there's a lot more opportunity to identify insights or take learning opportunities. And you're able now to reflect on the fact that, okay, medication isn't taboo, but at the same time, in your experience, it was something that was no guarantee it was going to generate sleep for you. It was in that bucket of eating separately from your husband, avoiding screens, getting out of bed just because you're awake. It was one of those actions that came with the intent of trying to make sleep happen. And as soon as you tried to make sleep happen, it just made it more elusive and more difficult.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It was a time where it was like, that was really rock bottom, was like realizing that, okay, actually medication isn't going to solve this. I have to work on my mindset and my thoughts around this. That was hard, like a hard pill to swallow. No pun intended.
You found an approach that you found helpful and that gave you that initial encouragement to try something new that didn't rely quite so much on rules, rituals, trying, effort. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I remember like stumbling across this article that this woman wrote, and she talked about, it was the first time I'd ever seen someone put into words exactly what I was going through. And she talked about how her struggle was even like, she was really in like the trenches for a year. She was getting 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night. And I found this article and I was like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I'm going through. And I think I also intuitively just knew that this was an anxiety issue. Like I went to doctors, like I went to a naturopath, I went to my PCP, all for like anxiety medication and like sleep medication, but I never went to a sleep doctor or anything because I just knew that's not what it was. Like I knew that something didn't just happen overnight that made me not be able to sleep. Like I knew it was kind of what it was rooted in. And so reading that article was like, oh my gosh, like someone else is going through this. And then she linked to some other resources. So she had linked like the sleep coach school with Daniel Erickson. She had, I think that's how I found your account as well. And then I went and did some more kind of research into those. And that's where I find like all your success stories. And I was like, oh my gosh, wait a second. I don't even know how many, but there's so many of these people that experiencing exactly what I am. And that really did change the game for me. And to know like intuitively, it just felt right. It felt like what the people were saying was exactly what I could relate to. And so I just went with that. I've read like Clear Week's book. I've read a lot into the ACT approach and like just working with the Anxious Truth podcast with Drew and Salata, like all these different resources, it just all led me there. And I was like, wow, there's something here. And yeah, that kind of took me on, started the whole recovery part of the journey.
The big epiphany moment was first and foremost just realizing that you weren't alone, that you weren't the only person going through this, struggling with it, dealing with all the difficult thoughts and feelings that come with it. And that in itself can be quite a relief and quite reassuring. And then when you dug a little bit deeper, you found that there was like a common theme among these success stories. And that really resonated with you because you compared it to what your experience has been. Can you share with us what the themes seemed to be that you were finding in these success stories?
The common theme is acceptance, I would say, is the one underlying term. But what that looks is the idea of befriending wakefulness and coming to terms with something you're really scared of, which like if you're have any sort of phobia, like if you're agoraphobic, you might start with the acceptance approach of trying to go out the front door for a couple seconds and come back in. And I really think it's very similar with insomnia. We've developed this phobia of being awake at night. And that clicked because I was like, that is because I would spend all day scared of what the night would look like. And even though no single night on the entire journey was ever as bad as it was in my imagination leading up to it, but at the time I couldn't see that. I was too in it. And I think the common like baseline here is just finding a little bit more acceptance. It just has to be a little bit to start before you'll see improvements, honestly. But finding a little bit more acceptance with the thing you're really scared of, which for us is being awake at night. And so, yeah, that's really where I was like, okay, if I can experience this thing I'm so afraid of with a little bit more ease, I wonder what that could lead to. And then there was also a layer of like how I was experiencing it during the day as well. And realizing this was huge for me. 2 months into this journey, I was like, I'm going to have to take a leave of absence from work. I can't do this. I cannot work like this. And a huge layer of that acceptance came to me naturally from just getting to a point where I wasn't getting any worse in the way that I was feeling during the day with the exhaustion. And that was a organic thing for me. I realized maybe a month and a half in, of course I was exhausted. But your body is so amazing at adapting. And so it was giving me more adrenaline during the day, which at the time I was like, oh, I don't want to feel so anxious, but also it was keeping me awake during the day, which I needed at the time. And I'm a teacher, like I said before. So I had this intrusive thought that I was going to forget my students' names and not be able to remember them because it was the beginning of the year. I remembered their names that year, just like I do every other year. Nothing was different. And I remember it hitting me that I'm tired. My brain is very foggy. It feels like there's a hot air balloon inside my head, but that's it. And I'm actually okay. And I'm actually, if I didn't tell, I did have a conversation with the principal at the time about it, just because I just wanted him to know this is what I'm going through. And if I'm like, if I call out of work, take a sick day, like this is what I'm experiencing. And he was very supportive. But I remember just it hitting me like it's been what it's been, and it's not getting any worse. And I think that was the first layer of acceptance for me of I'm actually okay. This is really uncomfortable, but I'm not going to die. Like I was convinced I was going to die. Like I can't, this isn't sustainable. You need sleep to survive. I was actually okay. And I was actually able to do my job. And if I hadn't told my principal, I don't think he ever would have known that I was experiencing this because I was still performing to that level. The lack of sleep was not getting in my way as much, honestly, as the anxiety was at the time, which is just so interesting to think back on. But yeah, I hit that natural acceptance of I'm okay during the day. That was step one. Step two was then the befriending wakefulness at night. That was really hard because it just feels so counterintuitive. Of course, you would prefer to be asleep at night, and it's okay to have preferences and stuff. But I struggled with that, I guess. That was a really long-winded way of saying acceptance, but yeah.
I'm glad that you went into a little bit more detail because when we just say the word acceptance, it throws up lots of different connotations or ideas. So I'm glad you gave it some context. There's going to be lots of people that come across that kind of approach. Maybe people that have really been struggling for years, if not decades, with sleep and are very skilled at the approach of resistance, understandably, who are going to maybe think, what if I accept the presence of insomnia? Surely it will get worse because I'm not resisting it anymore. If I remove that resistance, surely it's going to get worse. And the same with the daytime anxiety, for example, or whatever difficult stuff comes up during the day because of the insomnia, the fatigue, the brain fog. This idea that if I stop resisting that, what if it does get worse? What if these anxious thoughts get even more powerful, even more intense? What if I have a full-on panic attack? Did you ever have any thoughts like that or concerns like that? And whether you did or whether you didn't, what would you say to someone who's sitting here listening to this and thinking, yeah, that's my concern, that what if this does get worse if I take an approach of acceptance?
I would say yes, first of all, absolutely. I experienced doubt. And I still do have, I call them intrusive thoughts now, anxious thoughts. I don't consider them rational thoughts, but I do still get moments of doubt where I'm like, wait, what if this isn't right? What if this isn't right? And I think that it would be abnormal not to have those thoughts because you really are putting a lot of trust in your body's natural ability to do what it's supposed to do. And you've lost that trust when you've gone through insomnia. You're not allowing the insomnia to happen because you're accepting it. That's not how sleep works. You can't lose your ability to sleep. And it's going to put you in a position where you can actually escape the cycle instead of just coping with it and having it keep hitting you over and over again.
I like that idea of escaping the cycle because it does feel like when we're struggling or when we feel trapped, it does feel like a cycle of just we're trying more, or we're struggling more, so we try harder, then we seem to struggle harder, and then we try harder, and round we go. And if nothing else, perhaps this idea of acceptance gives us an opportunity to try something different, to try and get out of that cycle. I cannot and you cannot guarantee that someone will find it helpful, but maybe it's just worth exploring. Maybe it's worth playing around with or experimenting with and just seeing what you take from it, seeing what you learn from it, and maybe just adapting it in a way that seems to work or just feel work for you or feel aligned with who you are and what you want to achieve.
Another thing I've learned is that you're going to feel like you're doing it, quote unquote, doing it wrong sometimes. And that's normal. And I would say definitely just continue to practice the acceptance and everything through those moments. But at the same time, not every approach looks the same for everyone. And you can, being like at this point, I can tell like subtle differences in people's experiences. Some people find it really helpful to get out of bed at night, and some people find it really helpful to just stay in bed and let themselves. And if you listen to an interview and somebody says that it's really helpful for me to get up and get out of bed and go sit in a different space and then get back in bed later, and you fall into the trap of then doing that the next night, hoping that it will produce sleep for you, that's not the point. The point is to find that acceptance that works for you without trying to produce sleep. And it's tricky, like to find the balance, but it's possible.
I think maybe it comes down to whatever actions help you personally
Right.
move away from struggle.
Yeah. Yep. Anyone who's gone through insomnia knows there's nothing that's going to make you happy in that moment other than sleeping, but that's not the goal. What will make you like 10% more comfortable? Just 10% more comfortable. What would be a little bit more enjoyable? What would help you experience this with a little bit more ease is what I would turn to when I was struggling at night. Experimenting with what felt good at night, really trying hard not to find patterns that didn't exist. That's a huge thing. If something worked one night and didn't work the next, it would make me spiral again. And I had to just say, okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what you do as long as it's something that helps you experience it with more ease. So if reading this book worked last night, don't do it with the express intention of it making you fall asleep tonight. I would say over time, it went from 1 to 2 hours of sleep to 2 to 3. Then that lasted for a month, then 4 to 5 for a month. And then I was starting to get like a full night's sleep, very poor quality, like choppy sleep. I started getting really bad like night sweats and really intense dreaming. Like I would dream all night long, the craziest dreams. And I'd probably wake up every 45 minutes to an hour. But I was able to fall back asleep every time. And I started to be able to reframe it instead of, oh, I'm waking up every hour. It's like, oh, I actually fell asleep 20 times last night because I had to, because I woke up 20 times. And when I used to think I couldn't fall asleep at all, I did it 20 times last night. It was cool to see how it unfolded. And I really tried hard not to fall into a trap of frustration with it, where I need my sleep to be normal. I really tried to focus on like progress, not perfection here. Like I'm feeling better. I'm feeling more moments of joy every day. I'm letting go of the insane nighttime routines. I'm watching TV at night if that's what makes me happy. I'm a big Harry Potter fan, so I would read the Harry Potter books and watch Harry Potter movies at night, and just it felt good. And then it was from there, it was really just like my body learning how to trust itself again. And it takes time. It is not something that happens overnight. I would say it was 6, 7 months. Like it was a while before I felt like I was quote unquote back to normal.
One thing that stood out to me was the way you focused less on what your sleep was doing from night to night, because it's really easy to be like, oh no, I'm making progress when I get a certain number of hours of sleep or a certain type of sleep, or I don't wake during the night, using that as our only measure of progress might be setting us up for more struggle.
That is one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would give to somebody on that journey, is to not measure their progress by how much sleep they're getting, because that's trap. And it can lead you to spiral pretty quickly if you're only measuring progress based on the hours of sleep. And even at that time when I was recovering, still grasping this new method or way of thinking, I was definitely measuring progress on the number of hours of sleep I was getting. And I think that kind of contributed to some of the setbacks I wound up having later on. So yeah, that's a big piece of advice I give to someone, is measure the progress based on what you're doing during the day. Look at how much you accomplished despite feeling this tired. That's huge. You can measuring progress based on how the ease with which you tried to experience the night. So I'm not saying it has to be easy, but if you are like, even if you got up and went and cleaned or read a book or watched TV or something that made you feel like this is actually not so bad, but you still didn't fall asleep, that's progress. That's definitely a big piece of advice that I would give.
You hit this really smooth patch. Everything was going really well. You weren't really thinking too much about sleep. It wasn't really the focus of your attention. You're living your life. Sleep didn't really have much of a role or an influence anymore. And then something changed. This roadblock or this speed bump or this setback showed up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I would say I was doing really well, and then it came back with a vengeance. And that was when I experienced I had 3 all-nighters in a row, which was pretty scary for me. But I was experiencing them with a little bit less resistance still, because I knew about that, accepting and befriending wakefulness. But the sleep started to get better and the anxiety wasn't going away. And I think a lot of people who experience the insomnia struggle do relate to a lot of the physical symptoms that you feel. Like for me, it was a lot of digestion issues, nausea, feeling very panicky, having panic attacks. That would definitely come with it at night, heart palpitations, all this stuff. And I found that even as my sleep was getting better, my anxiety was really sticking around. And that I was trying to ask, what is this? What can I learn from this? And for me, it was like, there's still some fear here. And that setback, that was hard. And that was a really hard one, because prior to that, it was like, it was all around sleep. And now this time around, the sleep triggered it. But the physical sensations and like the panic and everything was just like so sticky. Ultimately, I came out of it the same way that I did before, but I think there was a deeper level of acceptance that I was lacking in the past. And that was all around my thoughts on it. And it's interesting because I worked with coaches from a couple of different programs, and it all boils down to a very similar approach, again, with the acceptance and everything. But like you said before, when it comes to acceptance, that's just like a word. And I was hearing this word and I was like, I think I'm accepting. Like, I think I'm doing it right. And it did help me sleep better for a while. But I remember reading Claire Week's books, and she talks about having a truce with your anxiety, where you've gotten to a point where you think you've managed it, but you might not have addressed the root cause. And so you start smooth sailing for a while and you think things are good, and it typically does come back because there's still that layer of acceptance there that maybe you're missing. And for me, it really felt, like I said, about my thoughts around it. So I could accept being awake at night, but I was doing a lot of like self-soothing, arguing with my thoughts, rationalizing with my thoughts, trying to comfort my thoughts. And I thought that was helping at the time. What I learned is that you cannot talk to the part of your brain that produces fear. It doesn't understand language, it understands actions. And so it's only through the things that you do that you can actually like work on rewiring your brain to know that you are safe. And that's when it starts. It's right now, it's like when you're in the midst of it, it's signaling everything as a threat. And it's looking for threats everywhere. So your thoughts are going to trend towards the negative, your symptoms are going to trend towards the negative. Everything feels dangerous and scary. I realized through this process that the self-talk that I was doing was actually doing more harm than good. And that was a whole other layer of acceptance that was hard to come across, because I was like, okay, I feel like I'm obsessing too much and doing a lot of trying to comfort myself. You're going to feel uncomfortable in this process. Unfortunately, that discomfort is going to be there sometimes. And a big part of this process is learning to increase your capacity to be a little bit uncomfortable. It doesn't always feel good. I would say that is unfortunately part of it. But I would say that the sooner you can embrace that a little bit, the faster you can work through that fear. I do think that mindfulness and meditation can play a huge role in the acceptance approach. If you're doing it not to get rid of your symptoms, but to learn how to sit with them. And that was a huge layer this time around. Honestly, I'm still working on it. It's been 2 or 3 months now. It's hard to explain, but when you start practicing it and it starts to feel more intuitive, you really do. You're like, oh my gosh, wait, they weren't lying. So I started implementing that layer this time around. And I think that was maybe a little bit of the missing piece of the puzzle. Of I was accepting that wakefulness and stuff at night, moving through it with a little bit more ease, but I was still really resistant to all the fear and anxiety I was feeling in general. And when I started learning how to sit with that, man, I don't do it with the intention of getting rid of the symptoms, but when you do start embracing and being okay with them, they really do start to ease pretty quickly, which is cool.
Wow, that's really insightful. Just like you can't directly or permanently control insomnia or sleep, we can't directly or permanently control whatever thoughts or feelings our brain chooses to generate as it does its job of looking out for us. And I love how you said that you can't really communicate with these thoughts and feelings. Your brain only understands what you do in response, your actions. And I think that is actually really empowering because our actions are something that we can always control. So we always get to choose how we respond to those thoughts and those feelings. And how we choose to respond often determines whether we're engaged in that tug of war battle with our minds, which our mind is always going to win, or whether we choose to drop that rope, let the mind just generate whatever thoughts and feelings it's going to generate, and we'll put our attention or our focus to some kind of alternative action and do something else. And as we commit to those actions, maybe then the brain in turn learns, oh, maybe that thing that I was generating fear or anxiety about isn't such a big deal after all.
Yeah. And it's so true because it's going to feel at first it's going to feel like BS at first because you're going to be like, you say refocus. And for me, that was so hard. I was like, okay, I'm refocusing every split second. I'm refocusing. You might refocus every split second for a while. You might have to. You might have to keep refocusing over and just keep doing it and measure your progress based on the actions you're taking and the response that you're giving and just keep going. And you really are I remember I would describe it as annoying. It was like, I'm so distracted by how miserable I feel. How am I supposed to refocus? Just keep doing it. Because it takes practice. It's like learning to meditate. You're learning to let thoughts and feelings just be there and come and go at their own pace. And it's not always going to take hours, days for those thoughts and feelings to pass. It's temporary, but in the meantime, just really keep going. It's powerful when you start to notice that it really works.
It does take ongoing practice. We don't get to a certain state where thoughts and feelings never affect us. They're always going to show up. There's always going to be a mixture of ones that feel good, ones that don't feel good, ones that are important, ones that aren't, ones that are useful, ones that aren't useful. The brain is just pumping this stuff out 24 hours a day. So it does take ongoing practice to be able to sit with them, like you mentioned, to lower the barriers, to allow them to flow, allow them to come and go, hang out as long as they choose, and to refocus, because these things are always going to distract us. And we can definitely become more skilled in refocusing, but that doesn't mean that we're never going to get distracted again for the rest of our lives. We're never going to hit that pinnacle of accomplishment. It does take ongoing practice. But with the caveat that the ongoing practice does typically get a little bit easier as we become more accomplished and more skilled in these approaches.
It really is it pays dividends very quickly and it becomes easier and easier. Pretty surprisingly quickly, I think, if you really are continuing to respond correctly and refocus and just keep going.
So people listening to this might be thinking, Laura sounds like a bit of a wise sage now. She clearly never has any difficult nights, never has to deal with really difficult nights of sleep, never has to deal with difficult thoughts and feelings. I'm going to assume that's not the case, but please correct me if I'm wrong. What are things like for you now?
So I would say on average, I'm sleeping well because I've done a lot of that thought work and my sleep has, as a result, improved. I absolutely do still have difficult nights like any other human being. It comes with being alive, but they're certainly fewer and far between, but I just handle them with less resistance. I know you talk a lot about doing what matters, living your life in the way that matters. And I think that has been such a big game changer for me too. I go do the things that are important to me, like cooking dinner and like training my dog and doing the hobbies I enjoy. Like I don't have to not do those things just because I didn't sleep great. And I do think that kind of connects back to increasing that tolerance for discomfort a little bit. Whereas before, obviously, I think most people who fall into insomnia are people that that put their sleep on a pedestal. And before, if I had gone to work after 2 hours of sleep, I'd been like, oh, I can't do like self-fulfilling prophecy. I can't do anything after work today. I know that's not true now. And it's not on a pedestal as much anymore. So yes, I definitely do still have difficult nights. They just don't mean as much now.
I like that phrase, they just don't mean as much, because we read into so much of what happens to us as human beings. And when something's considered to be an obstacle or a problem, we're going to read into it more and label it and categorize it and judge it and add so much more on top of what actually happened, which can in turn make things more difficult. It sounds you've just become more resilient, I guess the word is, to sleep not happening as you might want it to happen, or when difficult thoughts and feelings show up. This stuff is still happening from time to time, less frequently now that you're less resistant to it, but these things have lost the power and the influence they once had over you.
It's so powerful, like the approach in general, that I really do believe that it can change every aspect of your life, not just sleep. I had a really stressful like thing happen at work today. And in the past, I would have ruminated on that for the rest of the day. It probably would have made it hard for me to sleep. I don't care what happens tonight. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. It doesn't matter. I bounce back so much faster because I'm able to like, I I think, okay, this is the same type of anxiety as like the sleep anxiety. Anxiety is anxiety. It is what it is. Use the same approach. Refocus. What do I want to do now? Refocus. Keep refocusing. Keep refocusing. And pretty soon, at first, it was like every couple seconds, this scary thing that had happened at work kept popping up in my head. And after an hour, I'm like, oh, wow, I haven't thought about that in like 5 minutes. I haven't thought about that in like 10 minutes. And with time, this approach, you can apply it to so many aspects. And so when you say resilience, I think that's huge. Like your resilience to stress is never going to stop. I was thinking that today when the event happened. I was like, oh my gosh, this is bad. What if this sets me back? And I'm like, you can't avoid triggers, and like those things are gonna happen. It's unavoidable. This was going to happen at some point. Like something stressful at work is going to happen. But having the tools to deal with it with a little bit more resilience it's cool. Like it really does feel like a superpower at some point. Like you're like, wow, I can apply this to so many other areas of my life.
So this stuff is showing up and you ask yourself, what do I want to do now? That can be so powerful, because if nothing else, it's a reminder that you have control over how you choose to respond. Often it can feel like you have no control over how you respond, but ultimately you do get to choose. So this stuff shows up. Okay, what do I want to do now? It can take us one of two ways. One way moves us closer to the life we want to live, reflects who we are, who we want to be, and the life we want to live. And the other way pulls us away from the life we want to live, or doesn't really represent who we are or who we want to be. It can just be so helpful when we just keep our focus on what's going to move me toward, what's going to get me closer to where I want to be. Because for as long as our actions are directed in that direction, they're going to move us that way, we're always going to be making progress. We're always going to be getting closer to where we want to be.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Laura, I really appreciate the time you've taken out of your day to come on and to share your journey with us. I've got one last question for you before you go, and it's this one. If someone with chronic insomnia is listening and they feel as though they've tried everything, they're beyond help, they'll never be able to stop struggling with insomnia, what would you say to them?
I would say, first of all, you said earlier that I sound like a wise sage in this. And I'd say, even though it's easy for me to talk about it like this, it was not easy when I was in the trenches. I want to preface this by saying that I know how hard it is. Like, I know how hard it is. And it is, it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I've never felt that dark in my life. So, first of all, I just want to say I do get it. But I want to say that there is hope, because like I was there, and this approach really does work. I would say that there might be a period of time where it might even get worse before it gets better when you stop resisting. And it's going to be hard. I would say that too. Don't expect the work that you're doing necessarily to be easy 100% of the time, and try really hard not to do it to produce a certain outcome. Try to accept to move closer towards the life you want to live, like you say, except for that reason, and the rest will follow. And like I said before, don't measure progress based on how much sleep you're getting. Measure it based on how you are responding consistently and with time. There's a big component of getting out of our own way with this. Like, when this gets better is none of my business. All I can control is what I do in the meantime. I can get up and I can go live the life that I want to live with the anxiety. Come right along with me. You're invited. Let's go. And that's it. That's all I can do. It will get better with this approach. When? It's not my business. I'm just going to just keep on keeping on until things ease, and it will.
Great. Thank you so much again, Laura, for taking the time out to come on and share your journey with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it too.
Thanks for listening to the Insomnia Coach podcast. If you're ready to get your life back from insomnia, I would love to help. You can learn more about the sleep coaching programs I offer at insomniacoach.com. And if you have any questions, my email address is hello@insomniacoach.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Insomnia Coach podcast. I'm Martin Reed. And as always, I'd like to leave you with this important reminder. You are not alone, and you can sleep.